I really value about having Senator Dunnavant in the Senate is to have a doctor in there on Senate and Health. What a novel concept. And she is a conservative. She's a strong woman of faith, and it's just great serving with you. So
Thank you. Ditto.
Love having you there. And I always think it's interesting to find out what your kids have been up to. And you have one daughter. You're the daughter of a career naval officer and you were born here in Virginia. But your kids, you have one son that's in the Navy. Is that correct?
He's actually in the Army. He's
Uh-oh.
a virgin. Everybody in my family's in the Navy, but Cameron joined the Army.
Very, very good. Now, you have some siblings who've served in the General Assembly before as well, correct?
Correct. I have a brother who was a senator for, I think, 19 years and retired to go run for sheriff and is now sheriff of Virginia Beach. And I have a brother that is in the House of Delegates. And he's been there since 2009, I believe, 2010. And he serves from Virginia Beach in the House of Delegates.
Now, let me ask you, whenever you were in nursing school and then later med school, and I will tell you, she did all this while she was raising 4 kids. I have so much respect for her. And now she's a medical doctor. What motivated you to get involved with politics? Were you involved with when your brothers were running, or did you think they were crazy and wanted to stay away from politics? What were your thoughts at that point?
I thought they were crazy. I was happy to be a workhorse for them, knocking doors. I got involved, like so many of us, when Reagan was president, and I was in college Republicans and have knocked tens of thousands of doors in my life as a volunteer in politics for many campaigns. And so I felt very comfortable doing that for them, but I never imagined and consciously really kind of committed to not ever running for politics. My path was different with medicine and motherhood and other things, so it kind of surprised me when it snuck up on me.
And sneak up on you it did. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about that. What motivated you to decide to take the plunge and run for office?
Well, it was a couple of different things at once. One was the Affordable Care Act impacted my practice. We'd had a privately owned practice for 17 years. And with the Affordable Care Act, we simply couldn't keep up with the demands of health plans and process to compete. And it was the number of staff you had to hire to give the data, to kind of perform in all of these different ways was just exceeded our capacity. So we sold the practice to the hospital, and it bothered me that I became an employed physician. I really liked that fierce independence, so that was one super important variable. Another was that Walter Stosh had retired from the Senate. He had announced that he was going to retire, and I probably would not have run for an open seat. I admire you for doing it, Amanda, but it was something that just hadn't occurred to me unless the seat was open. And I think that somebody finally said to me, I was toying with it. I'd been involved in the community. I'd worked in, patient safety and Richmond Academy of Medicine and Medical Society of Virginia, and I'd lobbied at the General Assembly for MSV. And so I'd been involved for a while, and I felt like all the boards I was on and all the work I was doing just seemed sometimes to be a spinning top. Nothing ever actually seemed to happen. And I thought maybe the legislature was a way that I could affect change because I was frustrated for my kids. I was frustrated that it was hard for kids in their generation to find a job, that they'd lost the American dream. They didn't care if they bought a house. Not my kids, but generationally, those group of kids just didn't have what we have when we grew up. And so all of those things made me say, why don't I try this to see if I can have more effect than I've been able to have?
And I can tell you one thing that I really appreciate about Senator Dunnavant. I sit on a subcommittee in the Senate for higher education, and Senator Dunnavant, having 4 kids who are a little bit older than mine, has gone through trying to pay for college and just the frustrations with the transfer of the credits. And if you take them at a community college, then maybe they transfer, maybe they don't. And I will say, between you and Senator Sturdivant, the other Vant, you all have been champions to correct what I feel are the ills that are taking place with our higher education and the outrageous cost. So I appreciate you doing that, and that's just a side note right there. But we
all care about that education. It's so important, and efficiency is as important as some of the other things we look at. So, but you're right. We'll leave that one alone.
Gracious. Well, I think we're going to end up going to a break here in a minute. But what we're going to talk about today, Medicaid expansion is the biggest talk. It's the biggest thing we talk about. I mean, at the polls on Election Day, healthcare was the number one issue that people came to the polls with. Other than they were a little ticked off at some of Trump's statements. But other than that, healthcare was the number one issue. And, we all know somebody that has had cancer. They've had a medically devastating circumstance. And so it really is a bipartisan issue, in my opinion. Everybody's talking about it. And, back this summer, we had talked on the show about how we had several healthcare companies that were leaving the market. And at one point, Virginia was going to be the only state in the whole U.S. that under the individual plan under Obamacare, they weren't even going to have one option until the Commissioner of Insurance got involved and tried to draw them back into Virginia. And now we're looking at rates that are now increased by 50, 60 plus percent. Everybody's upset about their premiums. Nobody's happy, and everybody's saying everyday normal average families are saying, how am I going to pay for health care for my family? And so, we've been working really hard as conservatives in the Senate and the Republican Senate on coming up with how do you figure out this problem? I mean, we have, as conservatives, have said we are not going to expand Medicaid, and I've talked numerous times on the show about why that would be a bad idea. It would be catastrophic if we were to expand Medicaid. And we look at all the other states that have actually expanded and the trouble that it's caused those states having to go back into session because they can't pay their bills. That's a serious problem. So we don't have to look too far to see what happens if you go the wrong way. Senator Dunnavant has actually championed some alternatives to Medicaid, and we've actually voted on one of those options in Senate Health and Ed this week, and it's been referred to Finance. Now, we're going to go to a break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about an alternative to Medicaid. We'll be right back. Cut to the chase with Senator Chase.
I've been losing sleep, dreaming about the things that we could be.
I'm trying not to crack up at these songs that they're playing in the transition because it reminds me of my week and not getting much sleep, but I'm not going to talk about that. I want you to call in 804-454-1366, 804-454-1366. And Senator Dunnavant and myself, we both sit on Senate Health and Education, and we're going to begin by talking about the differences between Medicaid expansion and the current Medicaid waivers that are already being used to help our most vulnerable, who are usually kids with severe intellectual and physical disabilities. And I'm going to get Senator Dunnavant to go into more detail about this. So I'm going to kick it over to you, Senator Dunnavant.
Thanks, Senator Chase. And so I think that the way I would frame the question is that the governor's proposed budget has us pulling down a lot of federal money to help the most needy. And there's a lot of conversation about anybody that disagrees with that plan doesn't seem to have enough empathy or understanding of the fiscal value. So it's really a lot about money, and there's some shaming, to be frank. And I just want to say it surprises me when I looked at that package that it didn't even involve the 3,100 plus Priority 1 waivers that we have out there that are individuals that we've identified with ID or DD needs, and they are waiting. They have an immediate need for these waivers, and he chose to fund 825. And so it seems inauthentic to me that this is all about helping the most needy, because there's so little critical analysis of what we should be doing. It's all about getting the money and distributing it across the budget. So I've been looking for 2 years. I've been listening. I've been talking to agencies. I've been talking to constituents. And it occurs to me that Medicaid is designed to be available for our most needy citizens. And I don't know anybody that doesn't want that to be true.
And that's just so people, this is supposed to be a safety net. And Medicaid has been around for a very long time. And in fact, we have people that come to our offices every session. Some of them, just the parents can come because their kids are so sick, and they're telling us, expand Medicaid, not realizing, they're saying, we're waiting 10 years. We've been on this list for 10 years, and yet we get no help at all. And, a lot of times, I know a good friend of mine that lives very close to me, is a very dear friend, has a son with special needs, and she stays home and homeschools both of her kids. And that's a financial sacrifice. She stays at home. And, and thankfully she's able to do that. But it is a financial sacrifice for their family. But not everybody can do that. So, that's the challenge. I was talking to someone earlier today, and they said, what if we knew what this amount was, and we just did a GoFundMe page or did something and raised all this money? Do we have an amount, Senator Dunnavant, on how much money we're looking at? Well,
that depends upon what you talk about. And so to answer your earlier question, Medicaid expansion is a product of the Affordable Care Act, and there was an enticement by the federal government whose top priority at that moment in time was to make sure everybody in the United States had some sort of health coverage, and they thought this would be the solution to access for health care. And I'll note, even in states that have expanded and have done everything as directed by the federal government, there's still 11 to 15% of people who don't have insurance. Not everybody wants insurance. But having said that, the carrot was, if you do what we say, which is expand for everybody to 138% of the poverty level, then we will give you $9 for every dollar you invest. Actually, at that time, they said we'll give you 10. And so that's the Affordable Care Act. It's covering everybody from up to 138% of the poverty level. And the objection that came up as we were discussing this is, hey, wait a minute, Medicaid is designed for those with specific eligibility criteria with certain medical challenges. And are we actually expanding Medicaid to become nationalized health care if you're going to expand this to healthy individuals? And this is a shift in the concept of what we are paying with our tax dollars. And even at 9-to-1, we're not sure that it's the right direction to go for the stabilization of the medical marketplace.
And, an interesting point to note is that, you have the most needy who are already on Medicaid. What happens to the program if you overwhelm that program with healthy individuals? To me, it just doesn't make sense. So let's go ahead and talk about what happened yesterday in Senate Health and Education when you presented Senate Bill 915 relating to the Priority Needs Access Program. Now, as you expressed, this is an alternative to Medicaid expansion. It is not Medicaid expansion. tell people, how can they tell whether this is Medicaid expansion or not? Some people are like, well, anytime you spend money with Medicaid, then that's expanding. Anytime you add more dollars, I mean, that seems to make sense. But I think a lot of times people miss is that we already have money allocated toward Medicaid, and sometimes we get one-to-one match. Sometimes you get a non-to-one match, and it's very confusing. Can you sort that all out for us?
Well, let me start by saying that, you know, when I look at this problem, I'd like us to not allow the Democrats and the governor necessarily to define what we're talking about. We should not be talking about Medicaid expansion as the end-all, be-all solution. Throwing more money at this and throwing more money at Medicaid is not a way to fix the issue that you heard in the exit polls or that you and I hear every day from our constituents whose health care premiums are higher than their mortgages. We have a problem with health care in Virginia. And so my first thing was to look at it globally. And I have several bills in that address the private marketplace and the individual exchange and marketplace, which is where so much of the pain is being felt. I recognize that there are some of our most needy citizens who are not now actually covered by Medicaid, and it is really if we've talked so much about the opiate crises, we talk about 30% of them, the people that are in jails have a mental health issue that is untreated. And when those patients are released from jail, they then end up in crises because they're not connected to community services, and they end up in our hospitals. And so in many ways, these patients are already being cared for in our society, but not effectively, not humanistically, and not economically.
Yeah, it's expensive to go to the emergency room.
They can, exactly. So my point was to help solve the global problem. We have to fix the private market, and we need to look at a better way to meet the needs of some of these most needy people. So the bill that we voted on yesterday in Ed and Health in 915 basically expands a pre-existing waiver. So there's a state plan for Medicaid, which kind of directs how we do things in general. And if you, as directed very much by CMS, if you want to do something a little bit differently, you have to get a waiver. A few years ago, we got a waiver, and that waiver developed a program that provided Medicaid coverage for severely mentally ill patients. That was all. It was a very small population, and that waiver was used for that, approved by CMS, and it is paid for by Medicaid, but it is Medicaid that's been around since 1965 and not the Affordable Care Act that we saw from Obamacare. So that my proposal was to take that waiver that already exists and say, let's include some additional eligibilities so that eligible illnesses so that we can do a better job of taking care of people.
Very good.
This is how we bend the cost curve. If our ultimate goal is to control how much of our budget healthcare is and to spend those dollars efficiently, we ought to stop throwing them away in the transition from jails to the community, to the emergency room, to the hospital.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back with Cut to the Chase with Senator Chase. Welcome back to Cut to the Chase with Senator Chase, our weekly call-in town hall and radio show. That's right. This is a call-in town hall with your state representatives, Senator Dunnavant and myself, my Senator Chase, my twin sister, Senator Dunnavant. Oh, gracious. I also want to thank WNTW for the opportunity to provide this free public service to you each week. It's a unique opportunity for you, and you really should take advantage of it. So the number is 804-454-1366, 804-454-1366. And Senator Dunnavant is joining me live right now in case you're just tuning in. And, we're continuing to talk about Medicaid expansion and health care. And I know that all of our listeners are interested in health care and making sure that they can afford health care for their family. And so these real issues we deal with in the General Assembly, which meets in Richmond every year. And we don't meet year-round like Congress does. I know Congressman Brack comes on the show every other month or so, and we get updates. He's year round. We're not. So we cram about a year's worth of legislation into 60 days. And so that's where we are right now. And we're week number 4 of session. We'll finish up in mid-March. And so right now we are talking about Senate Bill 915, which is a alternative to Medicaid expansion. And Senator Dunnavant, I'm sorry we cut you off there in your great explanation here of what this
I'll be more
bill
concise
does.
too. And so 915 is more a way to stabilize cost, improve quality, and reach people who really are in need of support from the community, really from Medicaid. They're appropriate patients, and those would be people who have mental health disorders, those that are suffering in the jail, roller coaster that we've talked about, people who have life-threatening illness like the cancer patients who lose everything they have, people who have severe chronic illness. So instead of including in Medicaid healthy individuals, as empathetic as I am to their needs and the value of preventative care, I think that we have to be very careful about how we meet those needs, and that we need to keep Medicaid designated for those most needy individuals. So expanding that gap waiver, it was called the Governor's Assistance Program. I'm changing it to the Priority Needs Access Program. We would cover chronic illness, life-threatening illness, mental illness, and we have code definitions for those. We would additionally cover childhood trauma, early recognition and intervention in the schools, and connecting that with the federally qualified health centers. We talk about how do we bend the curve on the juvenile justice challenges, how do we get early treatment for autism or other things. That's how we do that. We would also look at alternative transportation. Those are for individuals who maybe have a TDO that are currently being transported by the sheriffs at great strain to that to the sheriff's departments that are doing it. So that's what's covered with that. It's funded with $1-to-1 dollars. Virginia puts forward half of the dollars. The other half of the dollars come from the federal government. Virginia finds those dollars by providing by assessing to the hospitals an assessment fee. And this is something that's done in many states, and it is, again, through old Medicaid. This has nothing to do with the Affordable Care Act, but this is the hospitals are going to benefit from these patients being insured, and we have them contribute into a fund. We use that to draw down dollars. So that's what we do with the Priority Needs Access Plan. 915 also proposes that we would draw down enough, we would assess enough money in those provider fees to actually fund all of the 3,154 or so Priority 1 waiver slots, so that everybody on Priority 1 waiting list would have that. I think we've had some discussions about making sure that we likewise fund the services for the brain injury population that we have here in Virginia, who have been on waivers in other states and have not been here, and it's a real challenge. And finally, we would actually increase the to help kind of stabilize the competition in the marketplace. We would increase the payment of Medicaid to the hospitals. Right now, Virginia only pays hospitals 72 cents for every dollar it costs them to take care of a Medicaid patient. They use private insurance to offset that difference. They also use those priority services like radiology and outpatient surgery to offset that deficit. If we raise their reimbursement rate to 83 or 85 cents on the dollar, it stabilizes that market so that we can deregulate COPN, create competition, and actually hopefully lower the cost of private insurance, because we're not trying to use that bucket to fill the Medicaid bucket, if that makes sense. So I hope that wasn't too long, but that's what 915 does.
Very good. Now, you all can call in with your questions, 804-454-1366, 804-454-1366. And so basically, we've talked about who the program helps, and we talked about who's paying for that. So basically, it's the hospitals who are assessed a fee. They're paying for it, and then Medicaid and the state are paying for it. So we're looking at every $1 that the state provides, there's going to be a $1 federal match. So
which is why it is not Obamacare expansion.
Exactly. Well, we will be right back after the break. Stay tuned. Cut to the chase with Senator Chase. Thanks for tuning in again to Cut to the Chase with Senator Chase, our weekly call-in town hall and radio show with myself and Senator Dunnavant joining us by phone today. And Senator Dunnavant, we have a caller. We have Mark from Chester.
Yes, ma'am. I was just curious when you mentioned something about adding something to an existing waiver of how that works. I mean, it seems to me like something they do in Congress. They add something to existing bills without ever putting it back through to get a full vote on it. If you add it to the existing waiver, rather than do that, could you apply for that waiver on it and stand alone, or by adding to an existing waiver, would it have to be reauthorized, or would it have to go through the approval process again? Or how would that actually work?
Well, I will tell you, I don't know the technicalities of how you would add an individual waiver. It goes through DMAS, and you apply. And I think he's getting Senator Dunnavant. I think we lost her just a minute. She may have a better answer than I'm going to be able to provide for you. But we do have, under the current system, Medicaid waivers that you can apply for. And those are approved, I believe. Do you have Siobhan back? Because this would be a good question for her.
Yeah, I was just curious how that worked. Whether if you had to apply, if you applied for it separately, rather than applying it to an existing thing, what the difference is that? Does it not have to go through the same approval process, or just how that worked? I mean, if it's best.
We have that waiver approved. To expand it and change it is very easy.
Okay, so say that one more time.
Okay, so the waiver that we already have for the GAP program that I want to transfer for the PNAP, once you've been awarded a waiver, many other states have been able to change eligibility within that waiver very easily. So you hear about how so many waivers for Medicaid are waiting at CMS and not getting filled, and for many other things, too, as CMS figures out how they're going to function with the new administration. But an existing waiver is much easier to manipulate than it is to get a new waiver.
So let's just talk about the length of wait of a typical person that is on an existing waiver. What is the average time of those?
Well, the waiver is a relationship with Virginia and the federal government. So if you're talking about a waiver you're talking about the Priority 1 waivers.
Correct.
If I may have misspoken, I was talking about the waiver for the services. And I'm sorry to be confusing. If you're talking about a waiver for the state of Virginia for an IDDD waiver, people have waited years, decades, and still been on the Priority 1 list.
Now, I know that's something that I have actually voted in support of every year that it's come up is adding more waivers and getting these people off the list, which I think is critical and ethical. But expansion is very different. So his question, I think, was, we have these existing waivers. What happens, if you, I guess, first of all, how would you apply to get a waiver? Would they go through their community service board or?
So I'm sorry, Mark, are you asking about the disability waivers that Virginia awards to those who meet the criteria, or are you talking about the waiver for Medicaid with the federal government?
Okay, I think Mark is no longer on the phone, so we'll just assume that he is saying a disability waiver. Okay.
I would not be an expert on the process. I think that if you want, you would contact your local. If I'm correct, there is a process that they assess how acute your need is, And I think that goes through the Department of Social Services, DSS, and that there's a standardized assessment tool. And based on the assessment that the variables that tool looks at, it's determined whether you're a priority 1, which means you need immediate assistance or assistance within the next year, or priority 2 or 3, which means you may not need care for longer periods of time, maybe even years. But for priority 1 waivers that have already, all those people have already been assessed by the Department of Social Services, and it's been said they need help right now.
Very good. Well, Mark, I'm sorry that we missed you. I think we've got some technical glitches over here, but you're welcome to call back in, Mark, if that was not the correct question there, or you can email my office. Either way, very good answer. Okay, let's go back to this the bill that we just passed. I guess the big question we ask: how's the program being paid for? How many people do we think will this cover?
It's a little hard to kind of do that analysis, but I have been told that it would be somewhere between 50 to 100,000 people that it would help, in addition to people we're already helping now.
Okay, very good. So it's been an exciting week. Any bills in particular that were of particular interest to you this week? I know we voted on so many bills this week. It makes your head hurt.
There's 2 that are important to me. My CBD, my cannabidiol oil, the THC CBD oil bill is on 2nd reading today, so it'll be on 3rd reading and will hopefully pass the Senate on Monday. And that's the bill that says in Virginia right now we are getting ready to compound basically derivatives of marijuana in the oil form so that they don't make you high, but they do provide a lot of benefits, especially for people with chronic illness and things like Crohn's disease and MS, and it allows them to take fewer prescriptions. In fact, with the opiate crises, people with chronic pain that are able to use CBD and THCA oil, actually in the states where that's legal, there's 25% lower overdose rate.
Yeah,
so there's a lot of medical benefits that we're seeing, but I didn't think it was appropriate the legislature decide what doctors give recommendations for the oil for. A doctor doesn't prescribe the oil because it's not really a prescription. They give a recommendation that they should have it.
And interestingly enough, I just want to note, it is pharmacy board regulated. So I know a lot of people.
All regulated, all very, very tightly regulated, very safe for the patients. And so that's passed out of committee and will pass out of the Senate, I expect, next week. I think that's really exciting. It's going to help a lot of people. And so breast cancer survivors that are going through chemotherapy. But anyway, the other one that I think is really important to our medical conversation is the benefits consortium. And let me look up that number because I'm terrible about knowing these numbers. But that's a really important private sector initiative that we have to lower the cost of health care. And essentially what we're doing is that we are bypassing regulations in Virginia, and I often think we have way too many regulations, and these regulations make it hard sometimes for associations to set up association health plans. And so we've created the opportunity for the Chamber of Commerce and the National Federation for Independent Businesses, NFIB, to work together to buy health care for small businesses at a much lower rate. They'll be able to provide these plans, and all of these small businesses that have not been able to afford to cover their employees, not been able to afford to cover themselves, will be able to bond together to get lower rates through the association, and they'll be able to move off the expensive individual marketplace and find plans that are much more competitive than some of the plans they're getting from the health plans where there's only one provider in the county.
Very good.
About that. We passed that out of the Senate today. Very
good. Well, Senator Dunnavant is super smart, and I'm so thankful that she's in the Senate, and she is super smart. I can't even tell you how super smart she is. And we actually defer a lot to her when it comes to issues regarding health and education. And we really appreciate you coming on the show today to give us a little background on those bills. When we come back, I'm going to give you guys a weekly update. Senator Dunnavant, thanks so much for coming on the show. And I hope you have a great weekend.
Senator Chase, I hope you get some downtime this weekend.
Yes.
See you Monday.
Thank you so much. Senator Dunnavant from Henrico County. I'm going to give you a couple other highlights from this week. I actually had a really good week this week with my bills, even having a bill passed today on the Senate floor, which I'm really excited about. Senate Bill 717 passed out of the Senate today and is headed to the House. And what is this bill? This bill will require insurance companies to disclose their commission rates when they file for rate adjustments with the Bureau of Insurance. And you're saying, translate that for me, please. Would you cut to the chase? And what that means is, can you imagine what it would be like if you had an agreement? Let's say you're a real estate agent and you agreed to a 6% commission rate and you did all the work, and then halfway through they changed the commission on you to where you were getting paid nothing. Yeah, that was really going on. So basically what I did is I required there to be disclosure and transparency. They would have to report the commissions to the Bureau of Insurance for full transparency. We're going to be right back. I'll finish telling you about some of the other highlights from the week. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Well, I can't believe the hour has already passed. We're in the final segment of Cut to the Chase with Senator Chase. And I'm going to try to I've got a caller on the line again right now, and I hope we have enough time to talk. Who is it? Judy. All right, Judy. How are you, Judy?
I am doing great. I have two questions, and with all my degrees, I have still confused about the subject matter that you already were discussing. So I have two questions. How does the state, does it override, for instance, in the past, I know that President Trump is changing that where you can ask if a person is a citizen or not. Is that going to be standard, or is it up to each state to decide if they want to do that or not do that? And how much of the budget goes to individuals that do not have to show anything or be questioned on their disability or their claims?
Okay, thank you, Judy, for those great questions. I'm going to do my best to answer here, and I will tell you that the state, what we're potentially looking at, and I've been talking to Congressman Brad about here at the federal level, what we're going to be looking at the state level, because what they do definitely impacts us, is looking at a block grant. And what a block grant does is it basically gives a set amount of money to the states, and the states would basically take that money and set their own criteria on how they would spend that money. We would set that up, and that's what Congressman Brad is aiming for. You know, it used to be that anytime we needed money, we would just raise the debt ceiling, right? And so with this administration, they're saying, no, we're not going to do that. I know we've been doing that for decades and decades and decades, and that's not going to fly anymore. So that's what you're going to see. So you're going to see probably a block grant come down to us at some point. I'm not sure if I can answer the question or if I understood clearly about the question about the disability. And I'm guessing what you're saying is the overlap of somebody who already has disability already. I'm guessing would they be eligible for this program as well? And I would tend to think not, but I don't want to speak definitively on something I'm not sure about. And Judy, I can get your contact information and try to get back with you on that. Good questions, and I really appreciate you all calling in. I've only got a few seconds here, but it's been a really good week in the Senate. I had a number of bills to pass this week. My bill, Senate Bill 716, which, we were talking about background checks and the backlog with Virginia State Police. and trying to correct that problem. If you're looking for a job, a lot of times they'll do a background check on you, but they can't hire you if that's not done. And if the Virginia State Police is backed up, then they can't hire you because it could take 2 months sometimes to get that background check. So that is one of my bills that has actually already passed the Senate. There's also a bill, which I call a transparency bill, Senate Bill 720. And this bill is basically has to do, okay, when you go to the polls on Election Day, typically you'll see the Republican candidate, the Democratic candidate, and sometimes an independent candidate. But if you are a constitutional officer running, meaning, let's say, a treasurer, commissioner of revenue, clerk of the circuit court, those positions, the local positions, you don't get that option to put that on there. And, I kind of like to know people's political stripes. I think it's good transparency. So my bill passed. It was Senate Bill 720. It was incorporated or rolled into another bill, Senate Bill 144, Senator Spruill's bill, and that has passed the Senate and is heading to the House. My health care transparency, cost transparency bill is done for the year. I'm going to bring that back next year. Met a lot of opposition from some of the doctors in the community, which didn't surprise me, honestly, because this definitely adds something that I feel like, honestly, they should be doing. But we can talk about that later. So I'll be back next Friday from 6 to 7. Tune in to Cut to the Chase with Senator Chase. I hope you have a great weekend.